So I'm Vicki Shields. I'm the Dean of the College of Social and Behavioral Sciences and Social Work here at EWU. And our college, along with the Department of Communication Studies, is sponsoring a 3-day visit by Dr. Michael Shapiro. It's my extreme pleasure to introduce Dr. Michael Shapiro, a Renaissance man among scholars. He is a professor emeritus of Slavic and Semiotic Studies at Brown, and a talented and influential linguist. His other titles include novelist, clarinetist, and blogger. These other loves and talents have found their way into his extensive examinations of the human language use. Michael Shapiro was born in Yokohama, Japan, and grew up speaking Russian, Japanese, and English. He immigrated to the United States with his parents in 1952. At Harvard, he became a student of Roman Jakobson, and he is an expert in the philosophy and semiotic theories of Charles S. Peirce. He was elected president of the Charles S. Peirce Society in 1991. To this day, he is the only linguist and the second non-philosopher to be accorded that honor. He has also served as the president of the Semiotic Society of America. Dr. Shapiro has held faculty appointments at Harvard, UCLA, Princeton, University of California, Berkeley, Brown, and Columbia. His most recent book is The Speaking Self, Language, Lore, and English Use. Please help me welcome Dr. Michael Shapiro.
Thank you very much, Vicki. I also want to thank my hosts, the chairman of the Department of Communication Studies, Gary Crew, and Professor Igor Kukana, who I met last year at Seattle at the Semiotic Society meeting, and one thing led to another, and that's why I'm here. I'm not a household name, and I don't dance on YouTube or turn cartwheels on some other website. But you might find what I say interesting and useful. And when you look at, does everybody have a handout? Yeah. I don't read papers. I will give you my ideas about the subject in a conversational style. It seems to me really idiotic to have to read a lecture after 50 years of teaching your subject. If you can't get up and speak for an hour about what you've been writing and teaching, then there's something wrong with you. But if you go to a professional conference now, 90% of the papers are read. They could just as well be passed out on the internet. So in my handout, you'll see that there is material there for you to consult when you get home if you feel like it. Appendix A and B are to be read at home. I guess I didn't, yeah. So that what's really relevant for today, as I talk about my subject, is only page 1 and just a little bit of page 2. The rest you can consult on your own time, and if you're interested. And it's not easy reading, so it's something that you might have to put aside and then come back to. The summary, I think, gives you a good idea of what it is that you're up against when you tackle a subject which seems so familiar, because the word style is in such common use, and you can apply it to almost anything, because after all, it comes from the Latin word for a writing instrument, a stylus. And so it's a manner of doing, just an ordinary, everyday definition of it is, this is not well designed for drinking water. Not that I'll need it. So the manner of how you do something can rise to the level of a style. It can become a stylistic basis. piece of information about how something is done. It can be neutral and have no stylistic bearing at all. So there's always lurking behind the rise of style, which I'll go into, is some kind of historical dimension in which something was tried for the first time, some manner of doing things. And this cuts across all human activity, not just the arts. It's not just, you normally think of style as pertaining to the arts, in the first instance, to clothing, fashion, manners of behavior, and so on. And I'm going to go one by one through my discussion points, and you can follow along. The first general topic that you have to consider, I think, is the relation between form and content. This distinction seems clear on its face, but it's not all that clear. It doesn't easily get defined, but it does cut across the boundary between what is style and what is not. And so you can say that style comprises characteristic features, both of what is said or performed or made, and how it is said or performed or made. So that style is the regard, this is a quotation, that what pays to how. That's the formulation, somebody else's formulation. The regard that what pays to how. Now this formula has obvious faults, which are obvious. For instance, architecture, non-objective painting, and most music have no subject, nor do they literally say anything. So the what of one activity might be the part, maybe become part of the how of another. So no rule based on linguistic form alone could determine, for instance, whether or not a discursive meaning is ironic. In considering linguistic style at least, and this is the basic minimum, and perhaps even style generally, it will soon emerge that the relation between form and content must in part be described metaphorically, figuratively. So that's my point about form and content. Content and expression. There's one famous theory of style, which is that of the French scholar Charles Bailly. I don't know if that name means anything to you, B-A-L-L-Y. And he identifies linguistic style with, quote, the affective value of the features of organized language and the reciprocal action of the expressive features that together form the system of the means of expression of the language, end of quote. And from this formula, or from this formulation, Roman Jakobson fashioned the definition of style as, quote, a marked, emotive, or poetic annex to the neutral, purely cognitive information, end of quote. I'll repeat that. A marked, emotive, or poetic annex, annex is the key word, to the neutral, purely cognitive information. So it's some kind of subsidiary information, whereas the main event is somewhere else. So it's as if it's an ad structure. Aside from my criticism of my old teacher, who was full of baloney on a lot of things, and he's dead and I'm alive, so. The impossibility, aside from the impossibility of consistently separating cognitive from affective information without remainder, it's equally transparent that definitions of style that trade in feelings, emotions, or affects go awry by overlooking not only structural features that are neither feelings nor expressed, but also features that, though not feelings, are expressed. So you've got all kinds of problems right away with Jakobson's definition. Differences between stylistic and non-stylistic. So if you're going to analyze this phenomenon which cuts across disciplinary boundaries and affects, and I'd say style is a determinant of human one of the cognitive categories that determine how we behave. You can think of style as an index, something that points, like a weather vane pointing in the direction of the wind. A feature of style may be a feature of what is said, of what is exemplified, or of what is expressed. But not all such features are necessarily stylistic. So again, you have problems of separating out something which is stylistic from which has stylistic bearing and that which does not. Similarly, features that are clearly stylistic in one work may have no stylistic bearing in another work. So you have an elusive subject that you're dealing with from the start. Nelson Goodman, whose name may be familiar to you from your courses on philosophy or even communication, is a Harvard philosopher now dead, I believe. A lot of these people are dead. He said, a property, whether a statement made, structure displayed, or feeling conveyed, counts as stylistic only when it associates a work with one rather than another artist, period, region, school, etc. End of quote. But there's no discovery procedure. There's no automatic way of discovering or isolating stylistic features, nor is there a fixed catalog of stylistic properties or traits. So again, you're on unsteady ground. Not every property that points in the direction of a certain author, performer, maker is necessarily stylistic in purport. For instance, whether or not a painting is signed by the artist is not a stylistic fact, although it is conceivable that habitual non-signing of artworks, when known to be characteristic of a certain artist, could become a stylistic datum by virtue of its having become, admittedly in a trivial way, at least I think it's trivial, as part of a set of values of that artist. And you must know such artists, because there are people now who make art who don't sign it on purpose. It's not that they don't want to be identified, they just don't put their names on it. Have you noticed that? It's in use, that piece of the work. Then my fourth discussion point is the perception and recognition of style. How do you recognize that something is stylistic? And here's where you're going to have to. This prepares you for the discussion of style in history. Not only is style necessarily embedded in history, there's no way of discerning the presence of style except in terms of what preceded. A provisionally stylistic, let's say that you provisionally identify something which you were going to call stylistic. You've got to be able to confirm it one way or the other with something that preceded it. And so that the interpretation that you're going to come to is embedded in what came before, in some historical dimension. So that the categories of style are necessarily retrospective. You cannot get away from that. The very assessment of style as, let's say, novel, the word novel as a label, requires a historical backdrop by definition. It's only in such a context that it becomes possible to evaluate the stylistic development of a given author's oeuvre. The very term classical is a reminder that style cannot be understood except in historical perspective, retrospectively. Beryl Lang, who's written a lot about style, says, quote, "Style, it seems, is never pristine without historical reference. It never reveals an object without also revealing a genealogy of meanings. For style, intentionality is destiny." Well, you can take that with a barrel of salt, that last part. But the historical embeddedness of style is not just an account of origins. It enters into its ontology, so it's part of the definition of style, of its being. and into its structure in the same crucial way that comparability, selection, combination, and hierarchy do. All those structural properties. The historical embeddedness of style, that dimension, which is retrospective, is part of the definition and interpretation of style. So you have petrified stylistic features in artifacts and texts from historically remote epochs and cultures, which are often the only source for subsequent recovery of meanings and value. If you do any archaeology or art history or anything to do with ancient things where the makers, the producers of this are gone, and so you can't interrogate them, you have to look at stylistic features because they're the only signs of how they were evaluated and how they arose. Then norm and deviation is an important opposition. Of course, the term deviation is loaded, right? We don't talk about deviance anymore, right? But you can deviate from a style. And numerous analysts have actually concurred in the notion of style as deviation from the norm of stylistic neutrality. You have something that's neutral, and then style is a deviation from the norm. Apart from the obvious difficulties that attend on the project of establishing a norm, it's clear that the quote, unquote, unusual character or quotient of a style is not a matter of deviation, even less of deviance, but of innovation. So it's a misrepresentation. It's not deviance or deviation, it's an unfortunate choice of words, because it's innovation. And why is innovation preferable? Because it is invariably part of behavior of particular individuals and becomes a full-fledged social datum only when it spreads to a significant number of the community at large. Of course, you can say idiosyncratic, you know. Shapiro has an idiosyncratic style. I don't know, what does he do? He looks to the side instead of at the audience whenever he doesn't know what he's going to say. Stylistic innovations are just as important, if not more so, for the study of style and the construction of a general theory of style as features that are fully coded stylistically. And this has been elided or forgotten or not featured. But innovation is just as important as things which we know to be stylistic features. One of the implicit assumptions of my approach to style is that innovations in the context of their appearance furnish the investigator with the most reliable testing ground for any overarching conception of style. So I put the emphasis on innovation and how they arise. Then my seventh point is style and troping. The word troping may not, the word trope has now become part of popular culture. And it comes from Greek meaning turning, so it's a turning towards or away. Like tropisms, flowers that turn towards the sun and so on. Troping means, that's just another word for creating metaphors and metonymies and so on, figures of speech. To underscore the stylistic, the status of stylistic features as units of meaning, there's an idea which I think emerges from an organic link between style and troping. That will be the main point of my talk today, which is new, which has not been taken up in the literature, even though I've published a lot about this. And tomorrow, if you attend my open forum, I will tell you all about the sociology of knowledge. Does that phrase mean anything to you, the sociology of knowledge? It's associated with French scholarship of the earlier part of the 20th century. But anyway, we'll save that for tomorrow. It means, essentially, that every piece of knowledge is embedded in some social reality. It doesn't just float out, like a beautiful flower. It's got to be interpreted by a group, and there are people for and against, and so on. The usual antagonisms between scholars who are willing to cut each other's throats over an idea. and not vote for tenure and so on. The two chief tropes being the master tropes are metaphor and metonymy. They have a structure and a dynamic that shed light on the development of style. Metonymies and metaphors are constituted by semantic units that have to be comparable potentially, then selected and combined in actual instances of troping or figuration. And finally, they have to be ranked vis-a-vis each other. So comparison, combination, and then ranking vis-a-vis each other. Style starts out as an innovation linked to an individual creative act that defines its uniqueness by establishing a hierarchical contrast with some relevant aspect of norm or custom. So you have a contrast between norm or custom on the one hand and innovation in terms of, it's always retrospective. So the troping is a troping on the norm, creating some kind of figuration, some hierarchical relationship between a piece of style and what came before, which is normally custom. The external connection, which is a metonymization, something which is like a metonymy. A metonymy is like parts for wholes or wholes for parts. It's always an external thing. It's more indexical, pointing towards. You know, if you say to the student, did you bring your Shakespeare today? That doesn't literally mean that they disinterred William Shakespeare and brought him to class and put him on. It means the book. So the book stands for the author. To bring your Shakespeare. That's a metonymy. This kind of external connection is invariably accompanied by or results soon thereafter in the reevaluation of that data's place in the overall system. In order to go beyond this kind of beginning or inchoateness as a piece of style, the data must affect a reversal of its status. It must cease to be primarily a fact of physical substance and become one of symbolic form. So that's very important. For style to take place, it has to stop being just a matter of physical substance and become part of symbolic form. In short, I say it must be metaphorized, because that's what's happened. The troping is a metaphorization, which is undergirded by a metonymization, because metonymy is subsidiary to metaphor. It's always something which is external, which becomes then part of a symbolic relationship, which is internal. The eighth point is style as figuration. Now, to a certain extent, we've laid the groundwork for a full-fledged consideration of style as figuration, which is another way of saying troping. Between style and troping, you have a parallelism that makes clear the understanding of style as figuration. Recall the connection between style and person that is emblematized in Buffon's famous dictum, le style est de l'homme même. The style is of the man himself. Have you ever heard of that? The man is the style is the man? Yeah, sorry women, you're left out of this. It's man generic. Style as man generic. You know, in the old days, in the Stone Age, the word man meant man and woman. I'm from the Stone Age. Buffon was a French naturalist from the 18th century, still worth reading. Defining style as figuration points in the direction of and ultimately substantiates Buffon's insight, but it does so through an emphasis on figure, Latin figura, specifically in its meaning of the human form. So that's where this becomes human. Anybody know Italian? No. You ever heard Italian? You ever heard the phrase bella figura? Yeah, that's the most important thing for any Italian, to cut a bella figura. You have to, it's all stuff. doesn't matter what else, you've got to cut a stylish figure, bella figura. If you ever learn Italian, that's one of the first things a teacher will tell you, that you this phrase bella figura. That's what, of course, lays people open to to being called superficial. But that's true of the French anyway, too. So, and they don't think they're superficial. The figura idea in this specific meaning of the human form. Now, interestingly, Latin finger, that's the verb from which figura comes, has a whole constellation of meanings that center on notions of molding, as of wax, clay, molten metal. That's the historical backdrop. Creating, producing, arranging, as applied to the most diverse matter. So here we're brought back full circle to the original meaning, with stylists making things with an instrument, including works of art and literature. Through this, it becomes possible to assert the natural union of style, figuration, and personhood or humanity. So this circle has now been closed. And that circle includes humanity or humanness. That's why I call this talk Style as a Cognitive Category. It's not imposed by some clever person on what human beings do. It's part and parcel, inherent in human behavior and in cognition, because our behavior is the outcome of how we think. Because otherwise you would be a robot. Of course, that's coming, cyborgs and all the rest of it. My prediction is that everybody will have a chip in their brain, and they'll go around doing things that they've been programmed to do, which might be convenient, I don't know. I'll be dead. This natural union of figuration and humanness, or humanity, is really at the heart of what I'm trying to convey today. Then finally, hierarchy and value. I'm very big on hierarchy and value. If you read any of the stuff that I have on my handout that I've written, over a period now of 50 years, which sounds obscene. I mean, how can you do this for 50 years? No, you don't find it obscene? Sometimes I think it. If I were a pianist, I'm a clarinetist, so okay, I've been doing that since I was a child. Anyone that seeks to discover and describe the style of a work must attend explicitly to the matter of hierarchy, to the rank relations among the elements or features that are being uncovered. So whenever you're dealing with style, you're necessarily dealing with rank or hierarchy. As a direct corollary, the analysis implies there's no such thing as value-free criticism, which some people talked about, when I was an undergraduate. There's no such thing as value-free criticism. Don't let anybody bamboozle you into thinking that. Whatever the artistic or behavioral sphere, just as there is no value-free perception or conceptualization, we as human beings are locked in to this prison, if you want to call it that, of seeing everything through a hierarchical lens. We can't function except in terms of, and value is a kind of hierarchization, right? I mean, the word value means that something is more valued than something else and so on. And in the sense that style has now come under the compass of figuration, it ceases to be merely and essentially a series of accoutrements. It's not just byproducts or things that accompany something else, and it assumes its rightful place as a central species of meaning through symbolization. Now, to wrap up what I'm saying in a different cocoon, I'll approach it from the point of view of the rank-ordered aspects of the figural situation, as I call it. So now that we've come to style, in discussion, we can now take it on as something much more fine-grained, what actually happens when we're doing stylistic analysis. The figural situation, which I've outlined under 3, consists of similarity, which are species, context, which are, because context always means something that's contiguous to something else. You know, this is a very abstract scheme, but I think you'll be able to put in whatever interests you that has stylistic value or that has purport stylistically. You'll be able to put your own material that you've been exposed to. And don't think just because you're a student you can't deal with this. By going back, you know, after you've gone home or when you have some time and you look at this again, you'll be able to put it back, whatever it is that interests you, because there may be art historians here, or musicians, or anthropologists. These 3 things are what I call the pre-existing condition or quality of the figural situation. It's comprised of 3 fundamental conjugate aspects which are co-present and rank-ordered in every trope. So we're now come to the point where we know that style, and know meaning I've convinced you, at least provisionally, that we have to talk about style as a form of troping. So now we can attack it from the theory of troping, which my late wife and I advanced in a book, which of course Princeton, in its ultimate wisdom, has taken out of print, and you can go on Amazon and buy it for $12. You know, you can find a bookstore that has some copies. I don't understand these publishers. They don't. Their reasoning doesn't square with anything I'd be doing. Here's a book that's referred to constantly by people in the know. You know, it's in every library and so on, and they don't sell it. So this figuration, it's called figuration in verbal art. So it deals mostly with verbal art. The pre-existing condition or quality in which the terms of the tropes, what I call the signatum. Signatum is a Latin word for a component of a sign. So signifier and signifier. So the signatum is that which is signified. You have the requirement of relatability, the perceptual and cognitive potential underlying the actual relationship of the 2 signata, that they must be satisfied by the terms in order for tropes to have some essence in the future. You've got to be able to compare things to start out your stylistic analysis. The state of being relatable. It sounds like it's automatic, but you have to look for it. Because things present themselves to you, and you have to then determine what are the relationships that make this coherent. Relatability. The state of being relatable is defined logically by 3 partially unranked specificity conditions on the signata of tropes. 1, membership in a certain species, that's on my page 1 at the bottom. Membership in a certain context, and what I call adumbration. To adumbrate meaning to foreshadow, literally. A potential order tantamount to value in the strict sense of value axiologically. Axiology is the study of values. Or dominance. So these hierarchy components are dominance relations. Something supersedes something else. That has to be there as the 3rd element. Rank or value. So that's 1C. Then we move to juxtaposition. There is an actualization of the substance that's represented by the pre-existing condition of trope formation, which is the juxtaposition of the signata, of these meaningful units. This juxtaposition is more accurately an opposition of terms. It's not just a juxtaposition. It's also an opposition. An opposition, strictly speaking, is not just a juxtaposition. And you have different kinds of opposition. So think in terms of privative opposition. A, non-A, that kind of negation. The membership in a context, then adumbration in terms of dominance, potential order tantamount to value or dominance, and then the actualization of that substance must be realized as you would in a trope, in the formation of a trope, which means that you're taking something which is not literal, but figurative, so that you're juxtaposing in a hierarchical relation that which this datum means and that to which the meaning owes its existence. It wouldn't be that if it weren't opposed to something which is not figural. I know this sounds convoluted, but you'll see how we come back. We'll zero back on this. The unranked triad of operations comprehended by the signata are one: selection, implying simultaneous reference to the paradigms of which the meaningful units are representative, two, combination of those meaningful units into simultaneous groups which are called technically syntagm. It's S-Y-N-T-A-G-M. That's a technical term which is useful. And finally, the imposition of ranking on these meaningful units, which have been selected, combined, and ranked. So there are three implicit operations that go on, and they happen simultaneously. But if it's a historical process, they may take time, so that there may be a temporal dimension in which you're straightening things out, determining what is stylistically relevant. The second operation, strictly speaking, is not prescindable from the third. You can't take it away from the third. So that whenever you do combination, you've got ranking right there with it. You cannot take the two, you cannot separate those two. You can analytically separate them, but in the actual way in which style works in human communication of one kind or another, behavior, making things, and so on, it's always going together. But it's also important to realize that the relationship is not bi-unique. It doesn't go in both directions. Ranking implies combination, but combination does not imply ranking. You can combine things without imposing a ranking on the things that you're combining. But whenever you rank something, you can't rank anything which you don't combine. That is, you can't rank one thing. It's always something that's been juxtaposed and compared, and then you impose. By impose, I don't mean, that Stalin is sitting there signing an edict saying, okay, this is the way we're going to look at it. It happens in the process of of the formation of styles that this happens. That combination is at the bottom of ranking. So when we review these parallel tripartite, notice that they're tripartite. It's always in threes. The first two conjugate aspects of the figural situation, we say that species denotes class membership. If you look at species. The signata of tropes are either of the same or of different species. Context denotes ground, in which the signata are embedded. The ground can be either shared or discontinuous. And then finally, rank is the evaluative component, which is superimposed on relatable, ultimately correlate signata. These three terms are coordinated with three distinct types of relation, which they implement. Similarity, contiguity, and value, or dominance. I won't fill out the picture to a greater extent now, because I think you'll have to think about these. The way I've set this up is not a way that you're used to, I'm sure. I can guarantee. from any classes that you take or any books that you read, unless you happen to have stumbled on that figuration of verbal art. Now, the most important, most significant aspect is what I call a resultant state or representation that is articulated by the meaningful units. And this is the definitions, or the definition of a trope. The ontological definition hinges on the concept of rank or hierarchy, and more precisely on the rank of order of the signata in the set presented by the syntax, the way in which the elements cohere. Metonymy is defined as that trope in which a hierarchy is either established or instantiated. Metaphor is the trope in which the simultaneously established hierarchy is either reversed or neutralized. Now, this is a very important distinction that has not been made, and which Jakobson, with whose name this whole thing is associated in the literature over many years, never made. He never made a coherent bridge between metonymy and metaphor. He just said metonymy is contiguity, when two things are compared. They go together, like the Shakespeare example, and metaphor is similarity. So his definition, and that's the standard, has become almost a standard definition. Metonymy, like parts pro toto, part for whole, involves contiguity, that is, things being put together, either in space or time. And metaphor is similarity. When you have two things in which one is a metaphor, when you're comparing two things, then that leads to what we call a metaphor. And what I'm saying is that metaphor is defined as a trope in which the hierarchy is either established or instantiated. And metaphor is defined as a trope in which the hierarchy is reversed. Why? Because metonymy places two previously unconnected meaning units into a dominance relation vis-a-vis each other. It gives overt semantic expression to the specific hierarchical relationship, which the two things contract independent of the trope. So if you've got Shakespeare, the man in the book containing his works, those are two independent things. And then you say that in the context, when you make them contiguous, then you can create a figure. But it does not, metonymy does not go further than the establishment or the instantiation of the hierarchy. And what metaphor does is it takes those two things that are being juxtaposed and it inverts them. There's a reversal of the order. Or it neutralizes a hierarchy. That's another one. Even if the hierarchy is one established during the metaphoric process only to be reversed. But reversal is the key ingredient in metaphorization. If I say to somebody, boy, you look like a tiger. Or you could say, no, John is a real tiger. That's a metaphor. It has nothing to do with putting John and tiger in the same room. You're comparing the attributes of a tiger with John, and vice versa. So, but what the important ingredient in that comparison is that you have to go beyond the comparison to say that the attribute of the tiger is superordinate to John the man, because John is being defined in terms of tiger, so the tiger is more important than man. And that concept is not merely comparison, it's a reversal of the relationship. Reversal in this case means importance. What's more important? And I insist that this notion of importance involves an inversion, a reversal of the two ingredients in the relationship, which is not true of metonymy. In metonymy, or that the two master tropes, remember, metonymy and metaphor, one is defined by contiguity, the other by similarity. But in the case of metaphor, there's a necessary inversion. The co-present ranked aspects of the figural situation I've now given you. And I'll give you an example just to finish up. I've got about 10 minutes, I think. Is that okay? I'm going to contradict myself. The external-internal opposition is absolutely crucial to the problem of style exactly the same way that it is to trope, because style has a double focus. Now here we're coming to the real event here. The first focus, which is metonymic, is external. There must be a perceived difference, as in a taxonomy, between a particular phenomenon that is ultimately to be understood as a stylistic datum. Ultimately, you're in the process of assessing. And one or more other phenomena with which it's comparable by virtue of belonging to the same natural class. The existence of variability and of recurrence is, of course, presupposed, so that in this respect, the formula style is the regard of that what pays to how becomes pertinent. Here we finally see how it's pertinent. The how would be indistinguishable from the what without a variability of the how. To repeat, the how would be indistinguishable from the what without a variability of the how. So you've got to have variation. Here's an example from modern British fiction. I don't know if you read British fiction. P.G. Wodehouse. It has to do with the interpolation of narrative material between bits of discourse and the stories. Here's an example. Hey, what's this? What's this? Old robot of Botham had lowered his cup and was eyeing us sternly. He tapped Jeeves on the shoulder. No servility, my lad, no servility. This sort of thing is a hallmark of Wodehouse's style. He habitually breaks up and delays the temporally sequenced utterances of his characters by interspersing narratorial matter. I'll repeat it. Hey, what's this? What's this? Old Robotham had lowered his cup and was eyeing us sternly. He tapped Jeeves on the shoulder. No servility, my lad, no servility. You know, that narrative interpolation is a device. I think that word can be used advisedly. And he does it all the time. He breaks up the utterance. The actual utterance was not broken up. It was simultaneous, but in the writing, he broke it up. And particularly when this strategy contrasts with the way people actually talk, but not only, the degree of regard that the what pays to the how is heightened. So here's another one. This is Oswald, said Bingo. What, I replied cordially, could be sweeter. How are you? What, I replied cordially, could be sweeter. That breakup. This becomes a stylistic data. And then you have to make something out of it. You know, it gives rise to interpretation, and you can embed it in your stylistic analysis. It clearly has an external focus. It's directed outward to a different sentence structure with which it is immediately paired by implicit contrast, one lacking the interpolation. So this is a bare minimum kind of stylistic situation where the interpolation creates a style, and only by virtue of comparison to a style which does not have these interpolations. So when you have this external focus, temporally discontinuous direct discourse as a stylistic datum, it relies in the first instance on a metonymic representation of unbroken direct discourse to which it's opposed. So that you have something which is, loosely speaking, a cognitive aspect. That's why I say it's a cognitive category. Is untouched by the utterances being discontinuous. but its affective, emotional aspect is relevant. Without this second component, the syntax in Woodhouse would not rise to the status of stylistic data. It does so by utilizing the existence of a virtual or implied contrast to establish a hierarchy between itself and its non-affective counterpart. Otherwise, it would not rise to a stylistic feature. Let's see. Do you have enough patience for a little more? Then, given the metonymic focus of style as a foundation for its perception and evaluation as such, you see that there's a two-level analysis here. You've got to have something which is perceivable as an instance of style, and that can only be done historically by contrast to something which is non-stylistic. If you read what I've written about this, you'll see that I have something called the life cycle of tropes, which I believe is an important discovery. That these things have a life cycle. That something which starts out as a figure of speech can end up being just custom, something that we say. And it just becomes a piece of the way in which we mean things. We don't think about John being a lion. You know, it just is a figure of speech meaning. It's only by analysis that we even think about the fact that something about a lion is being applied to a person. So, but you've got to have perception and evaluation, and it's the metonymic or external thing which catches you. But then you could say what it corresponds in this process to the metaphoric focus. Well, if it establishes a hierarchy between referential or denotative elements, which account for its being perceived as style, what is it that about style that's hierarchical, which then reverses or neutralizes, as between significational or connotative elements, which then account for its symbolic functioning? And the answer to this question involves the relationship between stylistic and non-stylistic values that can loosely be correlated with affective and cognitive content. Now, this is an old distinction between affective and cognitive, which I'm only using to orient this discussion without shocking you, because I believe that affective is part of cognitive. You know, that's where my Peircean training goes. But Charles Peirce was the greatest mind that ever lived in the Americas, the greatest philosopher, logician. He has a way of dealing with emotions which become significant. They're not just emanations of someone's particular ego. But for our purposes, let's say affective and cognitive are not the same. The affective content supersedes the cognitive. That's my analysis, which is tantamount to saying that the affective meaning is made to dominate the cognitive. So this is by ranking. If you take those two things, affective and cognitive, in a trope, and then by extension, if you buy my idea that style is ultimately always embedded in troping, in the process of creating figures, then this puts you in mind of something like definition of style as a trope of meaning. But what you do, whenever you have a stylistic situation, what you've done is you've taken the meaning and created something like a trope. And this has the notable effect of partly vindicating the widespread understanding of style as what's called an affective superstructure, but not an annex, you see. It's not an annex. It's not just something tacked on to making, uttering, what we do as humans. It's not an annex, as Jacobson would have it. So the affective dominating the non-affective and neutral inheres in any work that is taken to have stylistic purport. It's important to recognize as something organic to the nature of style. that the definition of affective, quote-unquote stylistic, and non-affective, non-stylistic, rests on a circularity that is hermeneutically, from the interpretational point of view, systematic. The hierarchy that utilizes these categories and the meaning of these categories are in a relation of bi-uniqueness, or they mutually implicate each other. Consequently, it's not enough for style to remain at the metonymic level. This is where Jacobson never saw the forest for the trees. Anything which starts out as a metonymy is going to lead to a metaphor. There is a natural progression, which I call the life cycle of tropes. Things tend to start out having an external focus, and then they're metaphorized. That's the way in which style works, no matter where it goes, whatever the disciplinary boundaries. If you think of fashion, that's a very good testing ground for style. And I'll stop now, so I don't know what you're used to. You know, and I think it's a matter of family. I've decided that talking at length, one feels comfortable based on your family history. For instance, I can talk for 8 hours a stretch. Why? Because, without stopping, because in my family, my parents talk to each other, and there were 5 children. I'm 5th of 5 boys. And so we had also a governess, a woman who lived with us, and she had no family of her own. Can you imagine 8 people sitting down to a meal every day of their life? 8 people sat down for a meal. 2 parents, 5 children, and a governess. It was like a second mother to me. So I'll stop arbitrarily, although I can go on. And I invite you to look randomly at some of the things that I've written. That's why this is not self-advertisement. It's just, I'm trying to help you if you're serious about this subject and want to pursue it. It doesn't have to be in 2015. It could be in 2025, when you're no longer a college student. And for some reason you have. What if you're, I don't know, a fashion designer or something, and you want to intellectualize what you're doing to make yourself feel better about it? Isn't that what we all do? But what's the takeaway? I mean, now that word is fashion, right? Which actually, I've been thinking about the word take. You know, it's a new formation in English, takeaway. You take something away. Yeah, what are you going to take away from this lecture? The idea, if I had to summarize, is that style is a kind of figuration, that it always has to do, that anything that becomes stylistic, or you can apply it. And I was saying about clothing. Why did denim become so important? It's not because of that cloth, but you know how denim started? It was worn by farmers and factory workers. That cloth, which was woven in this particular way, and Levi Strauss was one of the first, I think he came from Germany or Austria, I don't remember. But he produced this cloth, which is very durable. You've got bands on, and I'm sure they don't tear easily, unless you tear them on purpose. And what if you do? You put that tear at your knee, or you buy the thing with the thing. It has nothing to do with the use of that original use, but historically, you can trace how that thing evolved. And it always has to do with an attitude towards the symbolic form of that tear. Because it has no useful quote-unquote function other than signifying some kind of symbolic form, right? And what is that symbolic form? It's a stylistic deity. It's a style. Now, it's so trivial now that nobody would waste your time talking about it, except when you're trying to figure out what style means, and then it's a useful thing. That's why, if you want to think of clothing, it's the easiest and the most familiar area of analysis. And you can see that that word style is used for clothing so much and has a history. It's the easiest way for you yourself to make sense of what I've said to you today. Thank you very much for your attention.